Hello everyone, this is my OTT 501 module video. So I wanted to kind of just walk you through the module that I've made. I use Schoology with my current position now at Buffalo Academy of the Sacred Heart, so I'm really comfortable using it and I wanted to stick with it. And I like that we use it in our class too. So I am using Schoology for my module, and I've decided to set this up pretty much the same way we have our course set up. So I used it and broke it into 8 weeks and then put all of my content within these 8-week folders. So I'm just going to walk through and show you what my plans were. So in week 1, the students are given right away action sheets. I've really loved that Ron has introduced me to action sheets. I've implemented them in my own actual classes and my students love them. So this is what a typical action sheet for me looks like. My classes are not quite as intricate as our college courses, of course, but for this one, what I've set up is right off the bat, they're going to start building that community and creating that tone and climate right away with them with an introduction for Flipgrid. So they'll have to create a get to know you in this Flipgrid video. They get a couple of days to do it. And I just created a Flipgrid location for this. Oh, sorry. And my students now know how to use Flipgrid, so my hope would be that this would not be the first time for all of them using this, but obviously used it plenty, so hopefully this is nothing new. All right, so here's the Flipgrid video location. And so they'll do that to kind of start us out. Then when they're done with that, they have a set of readings. So in social studies, we've had some changes in our standards over the last year, 2 years, and they've gotten really, really heavy in our reading. So the students really need to know how to not only do a reading, like just go through and get content out of a reading, but also be able to analyze that reading. So understanding context and audience and authorship and bias and that sort of thing kind of plays into all of what they read. So I give them a lot of readings in my class. Their Regents exam now is almost entirely reading. I mean, it's really very mentally exhausting for them now, unless they're really conditioned for it. So I give them a lot of readings in my class, and I use a site called New Visions that I pull most of my content from. So that's what I did for this module. So this is a typical reading. They map these out really well, and I sort of edit them for what I want, but it gives them some really good visuals. It always gives them good primary sources and secondary sources, and has some really good ways of breaking things down. And then they always include some comprehension check questions. So they get one of these for this week, and they have to go through the reading, and then they'll have to submit the completed lesson or worksheet into this site location by Wednesday. So they have to do the Flipgrid and the reading. They also get in the beginning of the course a vocab. Social studies were really big with vocab. There's always new words for them and new concepts for them to understand. I'm not crazy about them Googling vocab anymore, and we don't use a regular textbook in my school. So I give them the vocab definitions, and then I ask them to apply it. So in doing that, of course it's taking forever, in doing that they get this sheet. It gives them the definitions, and they're asked to draw or create a symbol or an image to show me that they understand that definition. So that gives them a little bit of engagement here and some understanding of what those words are. And that's just week 1. Week 2, we start to step things up, and because I'm a project-based learning teacher, there's a lot more readings in the beginning of the module than there is for anything else. So this is certainly their heaviest reading week. So they have just a basic reading here first. This one's due on Monday. This reading here, reading 3, which is the characteristics of the Renaissance, is one of my favorite lessons to have an in-person conversation with the kids, because it's really engaging, and there's a lot of discussion points for it. It gets them talking about what they've seen in their own space and how they are familiar with things like pillars and arches and domes, and looking at art and recognizing pieces of art. And so I do a Zoom lesson for this class. So they'll do an actual synchronous activity with me for this one. And it's good too, because it's continuing to build that community and keep us engaged with each other. For this next reading, this is another one of the ones that I really love. They have to read this piece called The Prince, which is by Machiavelli, and it's based on how power is gained, maintained, and consolidated. And so they have to read through this, but while they're reading through it, they have to contribute to a Padlet. So I use Padlet as a form of engagement and getting them to interact with each other. And it continues that community, but it's also really good for structured controversy and kind of getting them back and forth or making comments on each other's stuff. And so I just loaded this one in here. Sorry, this is all going so slow. I loaded this one in here so that you could see what one looks like if it loads. Sorry. Here we go. So Padlet, if you haven't used it, is a place for them to, it's kind of like a parking lot, you know, where you have the bulletin board and then everybody puts up a Post-it. This is just a digital space for them to do that with. And my kids are really used to doing it now, so they are really good at it. So they just put their names on here and then their comments, thoughts, observations, questions. And sometimes they'll comment on each other. Sometimes they don't have to, and so they won't. Sometimes they'll kind of get into conversations with each other. So this is one that we had done in our class, and I just wanted to show you what an example of this would look like. So that is the principle. So they'll have to do that for Wednesday this week. And then they have one more reading, and this is just them spreading the Renaissance, and this goes in by Thursday. Now in this week, they also have a critique. So I gave them this discussion post, and they'll have to look at these visual pieces here. This kind of gets them engaged too, kind of getting that, visual part of their modalities going. And I really like using these pieces because most of them are pretty familiar to them, but it's asking them to look at it with the characteristics that we've talked about in mind. So looking at humanism and looking at emphasis on an individual and Greek and Roman influence and those sorts of things. And so I asked them to pick their favorite one and comment it in this discussion post. And then they'll have to comment on each other's on why the other one chose what they chose. So it gets them interacting with each other again. As we move into week 3, and I could keep showing you these action sheets, but they're all basically the same looking. They start out with some readings. In fact, I think they just have one. And so they just have to read the effects of the Renaissance, including the printing press. What's the effect of the printing press? And that's going to play a big role in our next part of our unit. They have to do a virtual tour, which is of the Sistine Chapel. And this is just a YouTube video. And the YouTube video is done by the curator of the Sistine Chapel and the person who takes care of the art space within it. So it's a really good video that kind of walks them through it and allows them to see the space. And I, as a history teacher, really love using virtual tours. They're really engaging, and it's so good for the kids to be able to see these places that obviously I can't take them. So this one is really, really in depth. It shows them different panels and various components of the space, and it really gets them understanding what this looks like. You can see it's very interactive, highlighting specific spots and telling the stories of certain areas. And so it's really nicely done. So I like this virtual tour. So they have to comment on their observations and thoughts about the Sistine Chapel virtual tour here. And then by the end of the week, they'll have to comment and reply on other people's posts as well. So just continuing that. This is a really fun project, and this one went off really, really well. This is the first time I did this, was just while we've been virtually learning here during coronavirus, and it went great. I get very specific with my directions. So this is how I post this is how I posted these project directions for the students. And I've edited a little bit for here. Their actual directions had actually a few more steps, but they get broken into a group. And then within that group, and I assigned the groups and told them, because being separated, I couldn't just let them pick a friend or whatever. I didn't want people left out. So I assigned the groups, and that sort of helped too, because it let me sort of level them and know where I wanted people to be. People that are a little bit more outgoing, I put with a couple people that are not as outgoing. And so that kind of brought the fun of the projects out a little bit more too. So they had to be in these groups, and then within the groups, each member of the group got a part of the context of the Renaissance. So somebody represented the who, somebody represented the what, somebody represented the when and where, and somebody represented the how and why. And they had to kind of research that little snippet and then create a 1-minute TikTok video, an individual TikTok video explaining their context piece. So there would be 1 minute on the what, and then 1 minute on the who, and then 1 minute on the when and where. And so each of them had to kind of do a piece of it, and this jigsaws together for one final compilation video that I had them put on YouTube as one whole video. And it worked out really well. It was really, really fun to see all their pieces, and I will share a completed one with you so you can see what one of them looked like. They were really fun. So they had to do this and work together. They did have a Zoom session where they had to be on and doing some brainstorming together on one of the days, and that's included and explained in the action sheet. And I just use the breakout rooms in the Zoom session to do that. And then we have the group video showcase. So then when they were finished with their videos and they put them all together, they post them here in the showcase, and then they have to watch everybody's videos. There would only be 4 of them because our classes are really small. And then they have to comment on all the videos. So they turned out really great, and the feedback was really great on all of them too. So that's a project I would have carried over for sure. Going into week 4, we move into the Protestant Reformation. So right away, they have some front-loading material here, which is reading about Martin Luther and the Reformation. And this kind of takes them through what happened. And then there's the Counter-Reformation, which they're not going to look at until later in the week. But they're going to do this first one in the beginning of the week. In addition, I like giving them some good visuals here, and I found a really great video that I liked that I put into Edpuzzle and did some comprehension check questions with, and that worked out really well, and it allowed me to kind of get some formative assessment on where they were at too. So I did that. And then lastly, for this week, they also get a slideshow. And I made this in Google Docs. It was very simple. I just took some pieces of content that I wanted to make sure that they knew and put some visuals with it and made it a little bit more interactive. And so I've been trying to train them on how to take really good notes. And so they do that fairly well on our worksheets that we do, but this one in particular, you know, they're going to get a lot of going through high school and then of course going through college, slideshows and PowerPoint presentations, and they've got to be able to take notes on them. So I made this one here, and then I asked them to copy it to Notability and then just annotate, make some notes, and then submit it to me so that I can see what type of note taking they did on here, any thoughts or reflections. And they really like this part. Reformation is very dramatic. So, you know, the wives of Henry VIII and Martin Luther banging on the door and the whole thing. We love Queen Elizabeth because we're an all-girls school, so she's up on my wall in my classroom, so they already know of her. And this is a fun slideshow for them to move through. So just kind of go through this and make some notes, and then that's due at the end of the week. So there isn't a huge project in that week, but they have a lot to do. And then going into week 5, they get introduced into the scientific revolution. So the scientific revolution is we're continuing to modernize Europe. The scientific revolution is an area where we really get a lot of forward thinking and using a lot of logic and reason and math and science. And so they have all these readings, and they're going to have to do all 3 of these readings by certain times, and there's due dates on them. And with those readings, I've also included a couple of videos. So these are really just YouTube videos that I really liked. This one is an overview. This one is a timeline video, and it shows the scientific revolution in relativity to other pieces and events in world history, and how the scientific revolution then impacts later history. And then I used a really cool thing that I found over the last couple of weeks of us doing this virtual learning called Nearpod. And if you haven't used it, I really recommend it. Nearpod is a location that gives you all of these really cool, it's access to really cool lessons. Oh, I don't know why it's making me do this. Hold on. Okay, just had to update that. Okay, so it gives you access to all these lessons, and I did this one first, which is just a kind of another little slideshow, and it lets them kind of take a look at some other components of this learning in a different way. So it's not necessarily just from me, it's more interactive, it's got some narration, and then in addition to it, you can see these students already did it, but in addition to it, they are able to watch a video that I created, just kind of screencasting and going through the lesson with them. So it's kind of a flipped classroom version where I'm showing them what they're supposed to be looking at and giving some supplemental information and explanation as they're going through it, just for my kids that I know are real audio listener, thinkers, and learners. And so that's the kind of front-loading part of all this. I then put in a Nearpod lesson check, which is a formative assessment that I found on Nearpod. It's really brief. It's just like a matching activity for them, which seems elementary for 9th graders, but they love it. And it's a great way for me to see what they know. And it just gives some kind of big ideas and some key people and key inventions and asks them to match what they are and what their effects were. And then they had a project to do. So their project is to create a Canva piece to show some of the achievements, discoveries, and inventions during the scientific revolution, and use visuals and text in a Canva to display this and showcase it. They had to do this by Saturday, and then they have to give some feedback on at least 2 peers' pieces by Sunday. And so that kind of takes us through the content of this module. What I did after that was I took the next 2 weeks worth of the module and I made them about the assessment components. So in social studies, we now have what are called enduring issues essays, which is sort of a way for us to check and see if kids can make connections and then make a claim, sort of like a thesis was, and support it with evidence. So we ask them to kind of take a look at some events or elements or characteristics of things in history and identify what we call an enduring issue, which is something that has affected many, many people over a long period of time. And so they have to go through this. And this one I've pulled from a Regents exam, a practice Regents exam that I liked, and it was relative to what we were doing in this unit. And so it gives them some really explicit directions, which they're very used to seeing. I put this on every test now so that they're conditioned for it for when we get to our Regents exam, and it tells them exactly what to do. And this is loading so slowly, I'm sorry. You can see my husband is a bills writer. I forget the draft is on tonight. And then it gives them these documents. Okay, sorry. So these documents are not loading. Let's go. Let's pause this a second. Okay, so they get these documents, and the documents give them some type of context and then some primary source. And then they have to kind of make some annotations and draw some conclusions from what they're seeing, try to make sense of what they're seeing, and come out of it by finding some connected tissue between the 5 documents. So it asks them to find these enduring issues and understand what they are. And sorry, my daughter came in. Okay, so the enduring issues essay is something that I'm really trying to get them to be comfortable with. And so it allows them to make those connections between those components in history and those documents. And then they have to write about it. And the writing part tends to be really difficult for them. So in this week, I build in some time for them to organize, because we're really starting to try to get them to pre-write and understand how important pre-writing is and how to do that, how to use that strategy to benefit their final piece. So they'll have to make a lucid chart to plan and organize their essay. And I actually did just do this with my students at my current school, and it worked really, really well. They really liked it. So this will be an assignment for them to create this lucid chart to use, and then they'll have to write their essay, and the essay itself is due on Sunday. And so they'll submit that here. In week 7, I ask them to submit that essay to a discussion post to allow each other to read the other posts. So what I ask is that they post their essay, and then they go on to, they have to be on a Google Doc, and my kids know this. And then they have to go into at least 3 peers' Google Docs and leave comments and edit and revise, or give feedback, give critique, show support, highlight some areas of opportunity, that sort of thing within their essays. And this gives them some good feedback. It allows everybody to share. I put a limit on it that if they see that 2 people have already been on there, then they can't go on somebody's. And so it kind of spreads it out, and it makes it good. It's another way for them to continue that community building and get some great peer feedback as well. And then they revise their pieces. Now, typically I would have them revise their entire essay and hand it in again. I didn't do that for this one. But that is what I do in my actual class. What I do for this one, what I did decide to do for this one, is do a self-evaluation flip grid. So at this point, they've now gone through this whole unit. We've had quite a few kind of summative pieces for me, so I can tell where they're at with their content. And this then leaves me to wanting to just make sure that they feel comfortable. What have they learned, and how can they reflect? So I have them do a self-evaluation using their peer feedback, the posted enduring issues essay rubric, which I post for them, and their own reflections. I want them to discuss what they thought they did well, and then also highlight what they noticed from others' work that they looked at, or from what they noticed people were leaving as feedback on their pieces, and that sort of thing. And so do that in a flip grid, and that's due by Wednesday, and that's the end of our module. So hopefully I have kept you engaged long enough. This is typically what my class is looking like these days with our virtual learning. I really enjoy doing it. it's stressful and it's a lot of planning up front, but I love the layout of certainly with Schoology and using this type of module and using those activities and ideas from the Tech Ed book. I've really loved too. So hopefully I caught them all. Thanks so much.